just a bit about the session today, a bit of a welcome, and then we'll dive into the agenda and do some proper introductions. Firstly, my name is Jacob. I'm part of the account management team in the UK for Zendesk. I'm really excited that I think we've got registrants and attendees from all over Europe today. We've got Ireland represented, Germany, Spain. So that's really exciting to see, and welcome to everyone. And I guess, we decided to put on this event as we're seeing more and more activity in the sports sector to modernize CX or FX, as we're referring to it, fan experience. And certainly from my perspective, what we see in the CX technology space is there are often sectors that lead. So perhaps retailers, fintech, banking, etc., and those that follow. And I think we're seeing that the time seems right for the sports sector, and that includes clubs, it includes governing bodies, events, venues, everything in the space. It seems like an opportune moment for those to kind of evaluate what they're doing from a digital customer service point of view. And hopefully today's session will provide some insight onto some of the considerations, some of the opportunities and benefits of looking at this kind of technology and looking at projects in this space. Okay, so moving on to the agenda for today. So again, welcome to everyone. Sorry, Siri kicked in. Again, welcome to everyone. What we'll start with this morning is a bit of a session looking at the landscape of fan experience. So we'll discuss some of the common themes, some of the pitfalls, some of the opportunities with Kean and myself. Then we'll hand over to our partners at redk, and they'll address and talk about some of the challenges that they look to address when they take on these types of projects, and highlight a really good customer story at one of the leading Premier League clubs. So certainly looking forward to that session. And then we'll wrap up with a Q&A. So we'll leave some time at the end to answer some questions that have come in during the session this morning. So again, welcome to everyone. Hope you find it a valuable session, and we'll crack on with the agenda. So just going to take a moment to introduce the panel. As I say, delighted to have one of Zendesk's premier partners, redk, joining us this morning. Tom, I'll go to you first. You're top of the list there. Perhaps you could tell us a bit about yourself, your role at redk, and maybe a bit about your experience working in the sector.
Sure, thank you, Jacob, and morning to everyone who's watching. So, as it says there, I'm Tom Jeans. I'm commercial lead for redk. Essentially, I've been working with redk now for around about 6 years. Been working with Zendesk as our premier partner for those 6 years as well. And for the majority of that time, we've been having conversations at many different levels with many different customers within the sports industry, whether they're sports clubs or whether they're venues within the sports industry. So we've seen a lot of different use cases and managed to help those customers move through that customer experience journey in multiple different ways. So hopefully we can share some of that best practice today for you.
Great. That's really good to hear. George, great to have you on. Again, could you tell us a bit about yourself and your role at redk?
Sure. Thanks, Jacob. Good morning, everybody. As you see, my name is George. I'm the lead customer service consultant as well as, I suppose, project lead at the same time. Similar to Tom, I suppose, I've been with redk now for about 5.5 years, and my role predominantly sits within more the product perspective, so looking at more things from a technical angle, so maybe more the reality. So understanding the challenges, what are we trying to implement, what are the processes that we're trying to achieve, and the goals or the objectives that we're looking for. Especially within fan experience, I suppose I look at it from two angles. From a personal perspective, I suppose all four of us were very much football and sports advocates, but also from a technical side of things, right? So understanding how can we join the dots essentially. And I think now more than ever, it's probably more than vital that actually supporters want that seamless experience, whether that's somebody's joining the club for the first time, so signing up, all the way through to purchasing a ticket, whether that's in retail, hospitality, so on and so forth. And really what I suppose the nerdy side of me brings out is actually how can we bring that behind the scenes for the supporter services teams, for the technical team, and essentially surface that data as well. So really excited to go through some of the examples we have later on, and also a pleasure to be here.
Great, thanks, George. And that's a really good point. I think there's two aspects to this. We're all interested from a kind of professional point of view in the technology that we're going to be talking about today, but we all have a kind of personal stake in it. And I know we joked about turning up in our respective football club shirts this morning, but didn't want to cause any rivalries this early in the morning. So last but not least, Keen, I'd say I'm slightly disappointed you're not wearing your flamboyant yellow blazer, but welcome. And could you tell us a little bit about your role at Zendesk?
Will do. That was my wedding suit, I'll have you know, Jacob. So it made an appearance recently. So I am a solution architect in Zendesk, and what that role lets me do is just shape solutions. So take challenges, take business requirements, and turn them into solutions with Zendesk. So that's my 9 to 5 and what we all do together. And outside of that, I will be following Ireland in pretty much anything, or Brighton and Hove Albion and Dallas Mavericks. So that is like what George touched on. Fan experience is different. Fans are not customers. Fans are, and they can't be treated the same way. And that's what we're here to talk about today. And myself, every role I've been in, I've always come at it from a sports point of view. I'm typically the go-to person for my colleagues to say, you know what, I'm going work on an opportunity with this club, with this sports organization. What do I need to do differently? And yeah, I just love it.
Very good. Good to hear. Yeah, thanks everyone. And we'll move on to the first sort of part of the session this morning, which is talking about the kind of landscape of fan experience. The format of this is predominantly going to be a Q&A with Keen. Tom, George, that doesn't preclude you from chipping in if you do have anything to share as well. So I guess the starting point, Keen, you gave us a bit of background there about your role at Zendesk, your kind of personal interest in the space. When we talked about putting the event together this morning, I was really keen to get you involved, partially because of your experience at Zendesk, but also in previous roles. Could you just start by telling us a bit more of those, a bit more about those previous roles and sort of why I was keen to get you involved?
Yeah, so it would stretch it back almost 10 years ago now, where I was at an event in Utah in America, tech conference. I was working with Qualtrics at the time, all about experience management. And what leapt off the agenda to me was a session with a guy called Connor Higgins, who was the research and insights analyst with Manchester United. So it was at that point I realized this is here. Like, experience management is a thing with sports clubs. And I was sat there wide-eyed, front row, and I've actually kept in touch with him since. And what always sticks with me with fan experiences was just how he opened the session saying, within Manchester United, they have this much attendance, over 99% attendance, week in, week out. They have this long of a waiting list. And for Man United, they know that there's going to be, the stadium's going to be full, everyone's going to be there. So what they don't focus on is how to get people in, is how to give the best possible experience for their fans. And ever since then, I've just fallen into it. So I had a small little stint pre-COVID with being a fan experience consultant, working with a lot of clubs down here in the South Coast. So I've seen it from the viewpoint of Premier League clubs, top tier clubs with them types of revenues, and how their fan experience impacts the bottom line in a different way to clubs in different sports, in different divisions. So what's exciting about the industry, I think, is there is no one size fits all the way down to the individual fan, to the individual club. We all have to be bringing the best possible experience for our fans and our organizations.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, and I was going to take it in a different direction, but just to kind of sort of double click on that in particular, what do you think the difference is when we talk about fan experience from a Premier League perspective, and then let's say a League Two club? And I appreciate there are different sort of quirks of different sports as well.
So I think, I'm sure I'll be very familiar here to everyone in attendance. There's an absolutely fascinating podcast by a fellow Brighton fan called Kieran Maguire. It's called The Price of Football, and it digs into the money behind football and everything that goes alongside that. And I think what it does is it gives an opportunity of us as fans, if we have a bad experience, if we have a bad season, we're not going to flip a coin and say, oh, you know what, Southampton's 10 miles the other way, I'm going to go support them. We're in for life. And while that's good in such a way that you're always going to have fans, you're always going to have the floor of that baseline, it sets the expectations of all of us who work in this industry to this astronomical level. Like, fans love clubs. Like, we all absolutely adore them and probably get far too passionate about them. But we also expect that to be reciprocated. Like, we want our clubs to treat us in the way we treat them, which is almost impossible. Because the one thing I've always noticed, especially when you move out of the stratosphere of, I hate the word big clubs, but global clubs that have already made the step to global organizations, we are working with absolutely shoestring sized resources, teams, commitment, doing a phenomenal job further down the leagues with the same amount of demands and the same amount of requirements from our fans. So I don't like to leave it with the thing of it's always an impossible ask to meet them demands and to meet them fan expectations, but that's what we're here to do, to try and help, to say, you know what, we know it's tough, but we think our solutions together are going to help you optimize that experience for your fans digitally, match day, and for everyone connected with the club as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I was thinking as you were sort of talking about that, we often in CX use the word loyalty when it comes to retailers, banking institutions. We use the word customer loyalty. When it comes to sport and football, rugby, across the sector, loyalty means something very different. And as you rightly say, fans will often should stick with clubs throughout their lifetime. Do you see that being sort of a poison chalice for clubs, or is that an opportunity to drive additional revenue, to provide a better experience?
So I always use the phrase, it's a double-edged sword, because the expectations are so high, you always have to reach that. But something I found fascinating, we took our young son on his first toddler holiday to Spain this year. So lots of Irish, English, German, Spanish families all together in one of these toddler-esque hotel resorts. And what really, really, really fascinated me was that there was two predominant jerseys being worn by all the different kids, speaking all the different languages, running around the camp. And I asked it to a few people saying, have a guess what it is. And I put the same thing to everyone on the discussion today. What do you think the jerseys are? The two main ones that everyone stood out? Because it was, the first one was Haaland, big number line, sky blue, Man City. And the second one was Al Nassr with Ronaldo on the back of it. And I think if we had said to anybody 2 years ago that the second most popular jersey in the Spanish resort would be from the Saudi Pro League, no one would have believed that. And it shows how quickly this can evolve. And what I think is so important for everyone in the fan experience industry is to realize that what happens on the pitch and what happens with the players, that will almost spontaneously create a new potential fan base. We have it down in Brighton with Matoma. All of our social activities, media activities out in Japan has exploded because of Matoma. So what we need to do, as everyone on this call today, is when we do get them on the pitch, activities that create a new potential fan base, is understand what experience can we give to people to retain them fans when the player goes, when the player retires. So we have all the potential opportunities there. We have all the tools. It's just how do we work to maximize them fans' experience so they are lifelong fans.
Yeah, no,
Do you
I think that's a really...
Jacob, sorry, I was just going to add one more thing, if you don't mind. The other side to it as well is the fans' expectations have, of course, increased over that period of time as well, because in essence, following sports, having a passion for sports is now a premium habit. And therefore, the expectation is you should receive a premium experience off the back of it. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody has to be in a hospitality suite all the time, but for your general football fan, for example, down in League Two, it's still a large proportion of their income that will be spent, if they're a passionate fan, on attending, buying all of the products around sport. And this isn't just limited to football, this is sports in general. So we have to understand that not only are they expecting to have a premium experience that is referenceable to any other premium experience they have in their life as well, But we have to be able to do that as seamlessly as possible within the same sort of budgets that they're expecting to. And that's definitely shifted a lot in the last, I'd say, 2-3 years in what we're hearing from our customers too.
Yeah, totally. And that would absolutely echo that from my experience. I've been working in CX for just over 10 years now, dealt with the industry for much of that period. And you're absolutely right. Those expectations have shifted dramatically. I want to go into the detail on that a little bit more. So I'll start with Keen. Could you give some examples of sort of specific areas that expectations have changed, either in sort of the nature of contact or how fans are engaging with clubs? And then I wanted to talk about some of the friction points. So what are some of the pitfalls and where can those bad experiences arise from?
Yeah. So there's a friend of mine, a guy I used to work for out in America, and they're starting a new fan experience platform. It's called Jump, and it's all about in-match experience, fan experience, and that highlights, I think, everything that we're talking about today. Because what I find as a fan, I live if I take my two clubs that I follow Brighton, they're down the road. What I want to do is I want to go to the game. I want that experience to be very, very frictionless. I'm not exactly pounded down the door for purchasing, but I want it to be an in-flight experience. So I need my experience to just be effortless. On the flip side, out in Dallas, following my basketball team, I'm a fully digital fan. So I do want to be kept informed, but I don't want any spoilers. And this is where I always keep coming back to the idea of it's impossible for clubs, I feel, to really give us that premium experience, tailor-made for every single individual fan, but that always has to be the North Star. That's what we're pushing towards. I suppose if I think about like what else do we do in terms of different technologies, we offer so much information about ourselves to our clubs. Every year we're renewing our season tickets, we're signing up, we're sharing. And what I find frustrating, not specifically about sports clubs, but just as a CX person and as a customer, as a fan, I hate to repeat myself. And I know I engage with my clubs, with my brands in a whole different suite of channels. And like everything in the world, we're being measured against the best. We're being measured against the delivery platforms, the online shopping platforms, who you make one purchase with them, they know everything about you and they can recommend there. And that's what I think we need to strive for with our fans, is that we need to offer them an experience where when the fans are communicating with us, we capture that information and use that in the future to give them better experiences. Birthdays, purchases, availability. We never want to be asking, can you tell me this again? Can you re-log in? Can you reshare this? If we can make the experience effortless for the fans, that's when I think we're starting to move into exceptional experience for fans.
Yeah, and you mentioned something there that I thought was interesting and sort of got me thinking that actually, although we see it as one organization, one club, and I would put sort of events, big competitions or even venues and stadiums into this as well, you could interpret it as a sort of transactional relationship. I buy a ticket for an event, I turn up to the event, I go home, happy if we win and sad if we lose. But actually, organizations are multifaceted. So there's your ticketing operation that will facilitate that attendance to the game. And actually, we've seen that this season, lots of clubs have moved to kind of digital ticketing and some kind of teething issues around that. There's also the kind of retail angle. So, fans love to sport their club's memorabilia and shirts and everything like that. And again, fans would expect to have a kind of premium retail experience. And of course, there are other areas. So, something happens on the day, I've got to engage with support services. I've lost my phone, I've lost my season ticket. Those types of inquiries, often peaky, spiking contact around that kind of match day. And the other aspect, of course, is the kind of hospitality element. So that sort of premium, as you referred to it, that kind of premium experience, and being able to manage the process, whether it's with a fan or whether it's with a kind of corporate entity. And certainly what we see, and I know this kind of flows into what Tom and George are going to talk about, is that often these departments are silos and data is held in different areas, and the dots aren't linked from that point of view. So again, Keen, I'll go to you first, but Tom and George, please feel free to chip in. Sort of, what do you think the techniques could be to tie in that data in a more sensible way and use it to your advantage?
Yeah, this is one of these things I can speak for hours and hours on. I'm conscious I don't want to eat into Tom and George's time later, but nobody ever wants to be that guy. But I was that guy last year. Pretty much, it was probably almost to the day. It was Brighton's second round League Cup match against. I was out in Gloucestershire or so on a Tuesday night with Forest Green, and sure enough, Genius here forgot his ticket. So I forgot my ticket for a Tuesday night away game. And I was calling the club, I was emailing the club, I was socialing the club. And when I talk about fan experience, I see a lot of similarities with our clients in the airline space. If you need to engage with support services on the match day, you're probably panicked. You're probably anxious. You've probably only realized there's a problem 10 minutes before something has to kick off. And when I say I was that guy, I was the one calling them, messaging them, doing that. And I wasn't giving the club, I wasn't engaging with them the best possible way. So how I think we can help clubs as redk, as Zendesk together, is with this omni-channel experience of, if a club can know, okay, this is this fan who's forgotten his ticket for an away game, and they know my number, my email address, all the different channels I might reach out to them in a panic, and can combine that together in their one fan profile, that makes life very easy. So you can say, okay, look, you can hang up the phone, you can close the chat window, we've reissued you your ticket, and thankfully Brighton did, and the lovely team of Forest Green sorted me out. But that's what it is. I think a lot of logic, a lot of reasoning that we use for other industry business processes goes out the window with fan experience, because it's often panicked, it's often rushed, it's often emotional. So we need to be offering this best-in-class experience with different channels, with different understandings of who the person is, so that the club can action based on every little breadcrumb of information we've ever given them when engaging with our clubs.
I think that's absolutely bang on. Yeah.
Just to add to that as well, sorry, Jacob, I was going to say, I think also in that certain scenario, most sort of sporting examples, these things will happen out of hours, right? These won't be happening in 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. So how do we surface that? How do we surface that support with the information? Or how can we take the information from behind the scene and give Keenan an example, his ticket, or tell him where he needs to contact or who he needs to contact? So it's about having the mechanics behind the scene to do that. And that's not an overnight process, I appreciate, because if we're coming from a very decentralized manual process in terms of the data stored on Excel, email, so on and so forth, we're not miraculously going to have these wonderful chatbots to tell Keen where he needs to go. So it's just understanding where those sort of data sources are, and that's exactly what we'll be touching on shortly. But I think it's important to highlight, right, that actually these experiences are not always going to be when somebody's at a desk, when somebody's at the phone. Actually, how do we give them that 24-hour service with making it as seamless as possible as well?
Yeah, I'd actually sorry, Jacob, just add one more thing to what George said. To take it a step further, that's from sort of the data side, but also from technology side. You need flexibility in the solution that you have that is able to support this process, because particularly within the sports industry, things change, and when they change quickly. We've been working with clubs across the pandemic. Fingers crossed, nothing like that happens again. But you need to have solutions that can still adapt to quick changes within either match day experiences or overall experiences of the particular sport that you're in as well. And so having that flexibility that doesn't cost you time and a lot more money is an essential part of the customer experience process as well.
Yeah, very much so.
I think my final word before I hand over to the lads for their case studies is that we talk about the expectation of the fan. What I've also done in my own experience with working with 24 or so football clubs, and it's probably the audience on the call today, I feel the people who work in fan experience, who work in the clubs, they are so engaged. The same level of expectation from the fans is the same level of delivery from everyone here today. So many people in different clubs wear different hats, solve different problems in that spontaneous manner. And that's where I think everything we're talking about today is enabling you, enabling the fans with the best possible tech and solution to be able to deliver these best possible experiences.
Absolutely. So we're going to hand over to Tom and George in a moment. I'd just like to just raise one last thing and ask each of you in a line or two what the future looks like. So there's lots of talk about AI in the CX industry at the moment. When we look at the sports sector specifically, briefly, and again, I'll start with you, Keen. What does the future look like, do you think, from a fan experience technology perspective?
I think where we'll get to very quickly is the way we engage with clubs is the same way we engage with our friends when we're sorting out where we're meeting up before the game. It will be a very quick, very channel specific, and whatever way you want to engage with the club, that's what you're going to do. And that's what we'll be helping our clubs gear up to be able to manage.
George, a couple of lines on the future of fan experience technology.
For sure, I think Keane summarised it quite nicely, but I think personalisation, making things more engaging. Not to say it's not at the moment, but there's one club in particular, I suppose a little bit more fun to myself, is that actually there are services where they remember your favourite player. So therefore you can surface videos on their best goals, or when it's your birthday, you get a personalised message from that particular player. So it's just keeping those fans engaged. And Keane, you made a really interesting point earlier. You have the two aspects. You have the supporter that's going to the stadium every day, or you have the supporters that are digital. So they're very two different types of engagement, different types of personalization. Maybe when it's someone's birthday and they're going to the stadium, you might want to give them a free drink or a free pie, a free burger, for example. Whereas when you're someone that's digital, maybe that's a discount on the club shop online, for example. So it's just making those personalized interactions, which I think does take a little bit step further than maybe what we see today. But yeah, personalization is the word I'd use for that.
Yeah, that's great input. And Tom, last but not least, your thoughts.
Giving me some room to work with. I think I completely agree with both Keenan and what George said. I think maybe, as you touched on, Jacob, AI being brought into the conversation is a key part of that. Obviously, we want to make sure that it is integrated cleverly into the practice, and it's not something that's actually causing a hindrance. We've all been on the end of particularly chatbots that purport to be AI chatbots that have actually caused more friction than function. But I do believe that is going to be the next step within the fan experience of bringing AI-driven conversational AI, and intent management within the customer experience is going to be key to making it more efficient and seamless for not only the agents on the customer experience side, but also the fan on the other end as well.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Yeah, those were really interesting insights from all three of you. So we're going to move on now to the redk section, looking at a customer story and some of the challenges that they've addressed working with one of their customers in the Premier League. So Tom, George, I'll hand over to you and yeah, go from there.
Thanks, Jacob. So just before we go into the customer story, just to reiterate where we're coming from. As you can see there, we are from redk, and we're a premier partner for Zendesk. To summarize who we are, I guess overall is we're a customer experience consultancy. We've been working in the field of customer experience for over 20 years now. And the reason in particular that we wanted to focus on sports industry is because firstly, we feel it's a very fast moving field at the moment. There's a lot of clubs in very different sports clubs overall, not just football clubs, but a lot of clubs in very different positions who've got a lot of questions about how they start that process. So we decided that it would be good to run through a customer story of ours who covers quite a lot of the main challenges that a lot of clubs come to us with, and it will hopefully give a few of you who are on the call today a bit of a better idea about where to start and where we may be able to help guide those conversations. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to name the club. However, I can say they are one of the most successful Premier League clubs over the last few years. But the reasons we wanted to share those is that they are at a very different point of their journey. It may not resonate necessarily where they are to where you are as you're watching. But hopefully we can give you an idea, a vision of what's possible, but also some of the steps that we at redk can help take you through to get that. And we're going to do it through the medium of the challenges, particularly that this particular customer faces. Jacob, if you wouldn't mind moving on to the next slide. Thank you. So data is the first challenge. Now, I'm fully aware that talking about data on a webinar is probably one of the most dry subjects you can do, but definitely an important piece of the puzzle. If you wouldn't mind just moving on one more, Jake, please. It is the most impactful initiative in fan experience. We've touched on it in the conversation we had already, getting not only the right data in front of the right person at the right time, but also making sure that you're making the most of the data, not just collecting data for the sake of collecting data. So those insights into fan behavior, preferences, interests, they're going to enable sports clubs to personalize that fan experience across the board, whether it's digital, on-site, as George hinted on, as well as Keen. I want to make sure that engaging those fans in a personal way helps create that loyal fan base, as Keen alluded to already, that we're going to increase that fan retention, that ultimately is going to lead to increased revenue streams across the board. So what I've just said to you is not a particularly profound statement. I'm sure a lot of you on the call will be like, yeah, okay, what's new? But it is still the biggest challenge that we hear from customers, making sure that fan experience data management is correct. But everyone is striving, no matter where they are in the journey, particular supporter services teams, I should say, to deliver that full 360-degree view of their supporter, to make sure that there is as much of an impactful interaction with that supporter as possible. But what makes this unique for sports clubs is that they're having the same conversations with their supporter at multiple different verticals. And what makes this challenge unique for sports clubs in general is the type and source of data that are collected at any given time. And making that as useful for the engagement for the agents or the person who's speaking with the supporter as possible as well. If you wouldn't mind moving it on as well, Jake. Thank you. So there's three different types of data that are really covered. And as both Kian and Jacob alluded to earlier, within sports clubs, there are normally potentially up to 4 or 5 different businesses working with the same end customers under the same brand. So at a high level, you could be talking about ticketing, marketing, retail, hospitality, e-commerce, to name but a few. All of those have got different interactions, but they need to be as seamless as possible with those, that the end supporter as well, and be brought into a wider 360-degree view. And this means that each club has the challenge of those 3 data types that you can see on the screen here, of operational, transactional, and aggregated, and making sure it's available to the right person at the right time. So we need to allow our customer experience team to make sense of which piece of information is relevant, which is up to date, and which is easy to access. And that's the key to making the sports services experience as unique as possible and as personalized as possible, as George has alluded to already. So what we do at redk is, what we want to understand is where that information needs to be available to the right person at the right time in that journey to make the most impact and make it as seamless as possible. And that's where we started with the conversation with this particular customer. So that's where I'd like to bring in George to talk a little bit more about the data challenge in particular that this customer has, and how redk approached this.
Absolutely. And I think the word omnichannel to start with is a bit of a buzzword, I suppose, right? And as you mentioned, Ed, on data, it will always be the biggest challenge we regularly see with a lot of our projects, not just within fan experience, but customer service as a whole. And I think we've all maybe experienced that with repeating ourselves and all the examples that we gave earlier as well. I suppose with this particular example, this particular customer, it was the biggest challenge was to understand how is the current way of working? Where does data live and sit today? Before we can even think about where the future is, as you mentioned, all those nice things in terms of where data might fall into different categories, transactional, aggregator, so on and so forth. That's all irrelevant if we don't understand where data is being held today and where it's being utilized, essentially. And what was in the next slide, Jacob, if you move on, essentially, is that this is I suppose, an exercise that we went through with the particular customer, and every customer, as I say, that we run through this with, is understanding how that data sits today. And what you can sort of see within this sort of visual representation, if you will, is actually that we went through a process of understanding where data sort of sits between each different, I suppose, area, different system. And when it unfolded, I suppose, was this chaotic diagram. Now, it wasn't exactly like this, of course. It's more just to show representation. But actually, we needed to do this exercise to really understand where that data is, where it's coming from, where it's going to. And really, the first point we wanted to understand was to pinpoint where is that golden source of truth of data. Because if we've got information sitting in certain places, we need to know which one system can we rely on where we know that data is being updated regularly, the customers can access that data if they need to update their personal data, and so on and so forth. So this was really pivotal in understanding exactly where that golden source, you can see in the center there, where that data essentially lives. And as a result, what we were able to design was a bit more of a cohesive model. And Jacob, if you just move on once again for me, please. We're able to then structure the data. We can understand exactly where do the touch points begin with the fan or with the customer or consumer in terms of the omni-channel experience. So where could we expect our supporters to contact us? If they do contact us, where does that information need to be passed through? And which systems do we need to call upon to surface the right information? As we can see, CRM, backend systems, so on and so forth. So this is really important that we sort of segmented this, right? To understand exactly where data is coming in, what we're doing with the data, and then where can we surface information, as you say there, with the aggregated data. So really doing these first 2 steps was key, and without it, we probably wouldn't have been able to move on to understand exactly how can Zendesk or how can we create the processes we require to give the best support to the journey they need, essentially. So as a result of that, what we're able to create was almost a combination of an approach. On the next slide, again, Jacob, please, what you'll see is something more of a bespoke application, which was enabling us to almost surface the golden source of truth of data into the Zendesk platform. Now, this is very specific to this application, but the crux is the same, essentially. What this integration brought forth was actually we were able to surface the information to the agent or to the support staff or supporter services and show them the information they need in real time related to that particular supporter. Now, what's quite important to note here is that this application actually accommodates the fact that diversity of data types that we might receive from the supporter. We've all been customers, we've all been supporters, I'm sure. We might not know our supporter number. In Keen's example, I'm stressed. I haven't got time to look at my previous emails. I just want to tell you my email address and my name. And I expect you to be able to find out who I am, where I'm going, what my issue is, and help me as quickly as possible. So those first 2 images really represent the fact that we can accommodate those data diversity types, and we can then search that and sort of bring that to the forefront of the agent. Then the final snapshot on the right-hand side really just underscores, sorry, Jacob, really just underscores the fact that actually we can do this automatically. So if we do know the fact that this person, Ivan Test or Joe Blogs off the street, is a supporter, and we know they're contacting us and we hold that information, well, then we don't need to be doing that search manually. We want to really be surfacing the information to the agent as quickly as possible. So yeah, I suppose in a nutshell, really understanding where the current state is today, and then really understanding what does the future look like, and then provide a solution off the back of that.
Thanks, George. And maybe you might also be able to speak a little bit. I appreciate time is not on our side, but if you're able to speak particularly to the expertise that we were able to bring at different levels to the conversation to help build that, and also how difficult it was to build that end application that we've just shown there.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's important to note that, first of all, I'm not a developer, certainly not by any stretch of the imagination, but what I can begin to understand is what is the business and organization trying to achieve. Therefore, we have a project manager or a consultant level, if you will. Then below that, or besides that, we have business analysts that can really begin to create user stories, really begin to document things that can then be shared not only internally from our side, but of course with the customer as well. And then finally, we can bring in the brains behind the scene, which is the solution engineers, the solution consultants, the Keens of the world, and actually how can we surface that data? What are the technical requirements? And really work alongside the customer with their technical team and almost come up with a hybrid approach and understanding that we have these skills and expertise, we have this resource, this is your solution, this is what you're trying to achieve, and therefore let's marry the 2 together, and then hopefully we're all on the same page.
Brilliant. Thanks, George. And I'd mentioned we mentioned earlier that the number 1 challenge is data. Don't worry, we move away from that dry subject slightly into a slightly more open subject, let's say, about which point in the journey each of the customers that we're speaking to is. That some of them are in a position where they feel like they've moved quite far down in their modernization challenges, as in they feel like they're quite on top of it. But there are also a large number of those clubs that we speak to that feel like they're limited by the technology they have or they should have. And are concerned about the effort that moving from one provider to another might have both time and cost, and also probably the overall experience to the fans as well. And this was definitely one of the main challenges that this customer brought to us, that was, or a concern that they brought to us about moving from one of their providers to another. So George, I was wondering if you might be able to talk to me a bit more about those challenges that they had and how we were able to overcome those.
Of course, yeah. I think also it's really key to notice that, or to point out really, that the devil is in the detail. Okay, so really once we start these conversations, we start these projects, these processes, these discovery sessions, that's where we really understand exactly what it is those challenges are. Sometimes the customer doesn't know what they are until we start. Sometimes the customer is fully aware of what we're trying to achieve and therefore the challenges that presents. In this one was a really nice example in the fact that we're moving from Service Cloud and therefore we're moving to Zendesk, which is a completely different platform altogether. So therefore, I suppose our primary obstacle was actually maintaining or managing the transition while maintaining operational efficiency. So it's not like we can just have the system go down, tell supporters come back another day. It's a 24-hour service, as we've already mentioned. So how do we make sure that that transition happens efficiently and obviously seamlessly for the customer and supporter as well? So our approach was a bit more agile and hopefully a bit forward thinking. So instead of what we might refer to as a complex data migrations, we weren't doing a data mapping exercise, which takes a lot of time, takes a lot of effort, and sometimes goes wrong, and therefore requires a lot of detail orientated tasks to be actioned. We use this and we leverage this as an opportunity to revamp the processes and actually almost utilize the fact that actually Zendesk is a really easy, sufficient tool to build new processes and workflows and not start again, but use what works really well from the past in terms of Service Cloud. What don't we like? What's the ugly? What can we utilize Zendesk in a bit more of an efficient way? And therefore, we can tailor Zendesk to the customer's needs and, of course, utilize the functionality as best as possible. So as a result, not only do we address the challenges, but hopefully we also optimize the fact that supporter services has a smoother operations. And obviously, we can leverage the technology because it really is flexible and easy to learn and easy to leverage in the future.
Yeah, just to, and that's a very good segue on to challenge 3, George. So absolutely, the ease of use of Zendesk is one of the major deal breakers that most clubs are talking to us about in terms of their supporter services. So how much are they able to own the tool themselves moving forward? And this is why we work with Zendesk, why we're a premier partner for them, and why we add our consulting aspect to Zendesk as a major tool, because we don't want to just create a line of service where our customers are coming back to us all the time for all the small changes they might need to make to their system. It would take weeks to do all of that, and it really would be inundated ourselves by doing that, but also there'll be frustration from our customers that having to do that. They're able to actually make all of those changes themselves and be more and come to us for the more impactful changes they're looking for from their service strategy. So larger integration pieces, more of a discussion around data again. Apologies for bringing that up again. But those are more impactful to the customer than changing passwords, adding new fields in, and those kind of pieces that actually can be done a lot quicker and probably more flexible in the approach that they're looking for from their service strategy. So we'd be able to scale the solution from both a technology perspective, but also a people perspective. And this was definitely a key challenge that we needed to overcome with this particular customer, George. So I was wondering if you might be able to add a bit more meat on the bones of the discussion around scaling with Zendesk for them.
Of course, and as I mentioned before, is that we don't make this transition or this transformation, if you will, overnight. So there's a series of events and series of phases that we want to adopt this, and we certainly use agile methodology for that because that works best in class for certainly implementing technology projects. What that means is we might start with phase 1, maybe otherwise known as MVP or the pilot. Again, terminology is fairly grey, but it remains the same principle. And so really what we see with this particular customer, but also, as I say, every customer, is really the transformation is quite remarkable because we did start with something what we determined quite simple or maybe complex in terms of understanding data, starting with a simple channel such as email, as you can see there in green, and then really leveraging the system or the technology to then really be able to scale the solution and adopt new ways of working. And as it's really important to note, as everybody's touched on already so far, is that the fan experiences change all the time. Whether that's a good result, bad result, new signing, so on and so forth, something's happened. So therefore, the technology needs to be able to do exactly the same. Something we implement today may not be fit for purpose in 2 days or even 3 months, 6 months' time. So how do we have a governance? How do we have a process in place that allows us to do that? As you already mentioned there, Tom, how can we bring in the BAU team or the technical team or the IT team to own all of that focus and then use us as an opportunity to maybe scale certain things, whether it's technology, data, so on and so forth. In this particular example, we also leverage with Zendesk is actually we used a bit of a data-focused approach. So as you saw on the previous slides, the fact that we could surface information from the external sources, what we're able to do is actually collect data, making valuable decisions, identify trends, refine services, and we're doing that based on real-time data. And then just actually on this slide here, what we're able to see, we started off with email, something fairly simple, something that we all use on our day-to-day lives. We then implemented telephony, social media, knowledge base, and then looking into the mobile application as well. Furthermore, utilizing Zendesk capabilities, we actually also adopted the Zendesk Sales CRM capabilities for the sales team. Again, we're creating more, I suppose, adding another layer of efficiency, creating a seamless integration for not only the supporter services, but also the sales reps, sort of looking at hospitality side of things. And again, making that experience for the fan by sharing that data and leveraging that data across multiple teams and multiple areas to be able to service it when it's required. So I suppose it's a real collaboration between not only the customer and ourselves, but also the technology to understand this is what we're trying to achieve. This is the technology. This is the data. Let's get it all talking to each other, and then let's make the most of that and get some trends and identify the needs that we have as a result.
Absolutely, and just before I pass back over to Jacob, it's worth also adding that all of what we've covered here, although we'd be loved to talk to in a bit more detail with everything that we were able to help with, all of this fitted into this particular customer's fan experience program, which had been a long-running program that had taken a lot more conversations than that we were necessarily involved in from the start. So we were able to still fit this into that process. So it didn't delay any of those conversations. In fact, it enhanced a lot of it, both from the technology side and also their personnel as well. And they were able to fit that into that strategy. So even if you have a current fan experience strategy and you're wondering how does this fit into that, it can still fit within that process. We're able to help guide that as well.
Yeah. One final piece I want to throw in so coming from the Zendesk side, what I've been particularly impressed with from the work we've done together with the redk team is that I think what's really important here is how you tie it all back to value, to budgets, and to time. And there's a piece that sticks with me from Gary Neville's recent book about, he has an interview with Steve Parish, the Palace chairman, and how he has this number on the screen of what it will cost if Palace get relegated and how that will affect their operating costs. And I think what we can all appreciate of people in the fan experience and sports club and competition is that our budgets are not like anything else. A few people throwing a ball into a basket or kicking a ball into a pitch, where you finish in a league will determine your budgets. Then budgets then trickle down to ourselves. And I think what I found particularly impressive with the redk approach here is that these projects, you action them quick, you help our customers share back to the club an ROI, a return of investment of why do this, and highlight that this isn't years and years in the making. When you're engaged, you can start working quickly, you can start getting results quickly, and you can start help actually reducing the cost of the fan experience team for the club. So it's a win-win of a better experience, more of an ROI, and less off the bottom line for the club.
Yeah, I would absolutely echo that, and I've certainly worked with Tom and George on a number of projects, and the conversations are always sort of outcome orientated. You know, what is the benefit going to be from a business perspective, from a fan perspective, and the other kind of key stakeholders in that process. So, absolutely echo that. We're going to move to a close in a couple of minutes or so. I just wanted to put one last question to Tom and George, and that's really about the kind of initial approach. You know, when you're coming to work on a new project, working with an organization that you haven't before, could you just talk us through sort of the steps that you would take to sort of run that evaluation about how you can help and how you can deliver value to the business?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the number one question I suspect that might come out of this. Like, where do we start? Often people come to us at the point saying, look, do we start with the technology? Do we start with process design, data, or the fan experience project overall, or somewhere else in the business? Who really is engaging with us? The point is to start somewhere. We've been in enough of these conversations now from the redk side, both myself, George, and our other team members, to know how to help navigate that process. So open up the conversation with us, whichever team you're in that you feel is being impacted by either a lack of investment in customer or supporter experience, or maybe just a refocus on that supporter experience. The process we'll run with you is to understand as you said, what is the outcome, what is the value to you of having this engagement, either in the short term, mid-term, and also the long term. We appreciate, we have to look at the longer term value of all of these conversations. We'll help map that out for you, either by looking at the solutions you have in place at the moment and how you can possibly bring those together, or coming up with recommendations of other processes that we have from our best experience, and potentially other pieces of technology that might help enhance that. And I say potentially because often if you're speaking to a customer experience consultancy about how they can best deliver best customer service, they say, right, change the technology straight away. But that doesn't necessarily fundamentally change the problem. We have to understand all of the processes first. People, processes, technology. Technology is what enhances all of it. We know the technology is there and it is best in class, in particular with Zendesk. But what we need to make sure is we're getting the most out of that technology. So we can start by looking at how we can bring the people and the processes up to speed to make the most of that technology, and then you'll be able to scale and grow from there. But it all starts with an initial conversation, and we can always help guide the conversations from there, because it isn't an easy process of saying we can come off of one conversation and tell you definitely you need this piece or we need to change this piece. We'll have to have multiple different pieces, but it's something we're more than happy to invest the time into do.
Yeah, and that's all you need. And that, again, I'll echo what I've been particularly impressed with our collaboration is we don't need people to bring us a big blueprint of here's everything that we're going to do over the next year. All we ever want to hear is problems. Like, bring us problems, and it's our job to bring you solutions and to help you show solutions to your club, to your fans. So that's the one word I would take away from the session of what do we want to help with. We just want to help with problems. Bring them to us and we'll get started from there.
Very good. Yeah. And really enjoyed that customer story. Sounds like that particular customer success on the pitch and good planning of it. Sounds like a good project to have been involved in. So we're going to move to a close now. So I will say thank you very much for joining this morning. Again, hope you found it a valuable session. Hope you got some insights out of it. If you would like to speak with any of the team, please let us know and we'll be happy to arrange that. Thank you once again. We'll leave it there.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.